Clara Blackwood's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the dusty silence. The barrel of the pistol felt like a brand of cold iron pressed against her temple. It was her 19th birthday, and it was about to be her last. "Give me a kiss, pretty lady," the bandit growled, his voice a gravelly nightmare. His breath was hot and sour, a sickening mix of whiskey and rot that turned her stomach. "Before I take what I want and leave you for the buzzards." Just moments ago, she was a passenger. Now she was the sole survivor. The stagecoach lay splintered and broken 100 yards down the trail, its driver a crumpled heap in the dirt. Her meager belongings, every cent she owned in the world, were scattered across the floor of this desolate way station. But they weren't interested in her money anymore. "I ain't asking again," the man snarled, his grip tightening on her arm, his knuckles digging into her skin. He leaned in closer, his grimy bandana scratching her cheek. "Just one little kiss. First one, ain't it? I can always tell with the proper ones." Tears streamed down her face, carving clean paths through the layers of dust and grime. 19 years. 19 years of saving herself, of dreaming of a gentle romance, of holding on to propriety like a shield in the rough-and-tumble world of her father's saloon. All of it was about to be shattered, stolen by a monster in the Arizona heat. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the violation. And then a sound cut through the air. A sound so clean, so sharp and final it stopped her heart cold. The unmistakable click of a rifle being cocked. "I believe the lady isn't interested." The voice came from the doorway, deep and steady as a river. Clara's eyes flew open. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the blinding sun, a wide-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow. He held a long rifle in his hands, and it wasn't shaking. Not one bit. The bandit holding her spat on the floor. "Who the hell are you?" The stranger took a step forward, his boots stirring the dust. "Just a man who doesn't take kindly to seeing a lady in distress." As he moved out of the sun's glare, Clara could see him more clearly. A square jaw covered in stubble, shoulders wide enough to fill the doorway, and eyes the color of a winter sky. Hard eyes, eyes that had seen things. "This ain't your business, cowboy," another of the bandits warned, his hand dropping to the pistol at his hip. It was the last mistake he ever made. The stranger's rifle cracked. Once, twice, a third time. The shots were so fast they almost sounded like one. Each one found its mark. The bandits crumpled to the floor like discarded puppets, their hands frozen halfway to their guns. Clara stood in stunned silence, the world tilting on its axis. The man who had been breathing on her neck seconds ago now lay at her feet, a dark, ugly stain spreading across his chest. The silence in the room was louder than the gunshots had been. The cowboy lowered his rifle. He stepped over the bodies as if they were nothing more than sacks of grain and stopped in front of her. "Miss," he said, his voice softer now. "Are you hurt?" Clara opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her knees gave way. The floor rushed up to meet her, but she never hit it. Strong arms caught her, holding her steady. "Easy now," the cowboy murmured. "You're safe. My name's Elijah." "Clara Blackwood," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. I thought—" "I know what you thought," Elijah said, his voice gentle but firm. "But some things ought to remain sacred." She looked up into his weathered face and saw something unexpected. Kindness. It was there, hiding behind the steel in his eyes. She was clinging to a man who had just killed 3 other men without a flicker of hesitation, and she had never felt safer in her entire life. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice finally returning. Elijah just nodded once. "We need to move. Their friends might be nearby." He helped her to her feet, his touch steady and respectful. He began gathering her things, his movements efficient and precise. "Where were you headed, Miss Blackwood?" "Silver Creek. My aunt lives there. I was going to stay with her." The words caught in her throat. The memories were too fresh, too raw. "After what?" he asked, his eyes missing nothing. "After my father died," Clara said, the pain a dull ache in her chest. "The bank took our home, the saloon. There was nothing left for me." Elijah paused his work. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment she saw that shared flicker of loss in his eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss." The words were simple, but they were real. It was more than anyone else had offered. "Silver Creek is a 3-day ride from here," he said, his tone all business again as he handed her the restored valise. "I'm headed that way myself. If you'll allow it, I'd be honored to escort you." She hesitated. She knew nothing about this man, this killer, this savior. But the alternative, staying here with the dead or walking into the desert alone, was no choice at all. "I'd be grateful for your protection, Mr. Dawson." "Just Elijah," he corrected. "I've got a horse out back. We should be miles from here before nightfall." As they stepped back out into the blistering sun, Clara glanced back at the station. "Shouldn't we do something about them?" Elijah's face hardened. "Those men were part of the Raven Gang. They've been terrorizing this territory for months. The law will thank us for leaving them right where they are." He let out a sharp whistle. A magnificent chestnut stallion trotted around the corner, its coat gleaming like polished copper. "This is Thunder. He's strong enough to carry us both until we can find you a mount." Clara stared at the horse. It was a beast, powerful and intelligent. I've never ridden before." Elijah's eyebrows shot up. "Well, Miss Blackwood," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, "it seems today is a day of firsts for you." Before she could react, his hands were on her waist, and he lifted her onto the saddle as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped, her hands flying to the saddle horn. He swung up behind her in one smooth, fluid motion, his chest a wall of warmth against her back. His arms came around her to take the reins. "You'll want to hold on," he advised, his voice a low rumble against her ear. As the horse broke into a trot, Clara was acutely aware of him. The heat radiating from his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the sheer strength in the arms that held her safe. She had never been this close to a man in her life. And it was terrifying and thrilling. After an hour of riding in silence, she had to ask, "What brings you to Silver Creek, Elijah?" "Business," he said, his tone flat. "What sort of business?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was grim. "The kind that involves men like the ones back at that station." "So, you're a bounty hunter?" He didn't answer directly. "Let's just say I solve problems for people." "Are you always this mysterious?" The question slipped out, bolder than she intended. She felt the rumble of a chuckle in his chest. "Only with beautiful women I rescue from stagecoach robbers." Clara's face burned hot, and for the first time that day, it had nothing to do with the sun. They rode until the sky bled into shades of orange and pink, and Elijah guided them into a small hidden canyon with a trickle of a creek. "We'll camp here tonight." He dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist for a moment longer than necessary, steadying her as her tired legs trembled. He set up camp with the practiced ease of a man who called the wilderness home. He built a small smokeless fire, and soon the smell of coffee and beans filled the air. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked, feeling utterly useless. "You can talk to me," he said, his blue eyes catching the firelight. "Tell me about yourself, Clara Blackwood." So she did. She told him about her father, the saloon, the housekeepers who had tried to make her a lady, and he listened, really listened. "And your mother?" he asked when she paused. "She died when I was 4. Consumption. I barely remember her." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "My mother died when I was 10. Fever. My father was shot dead over a cattle dispute when I was 15. I've been on my own since then." The words were spoken without self-pity, a simple statement of fact, but Clara saw the deep well of pain behind them. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He looked at her across the flickering flames, and in that moment, she felt a connection, a shared understanding of what it meant to be alone in the world. As they ate their simple meal, the silence was comfortable, not awkward. The plain beans tasted like a feast. "You take the bedroll," he said when they were done, gesturing to the single roll he'd unpacked. "I'll keep watch." "But you need to sleep too." "Those men had friends," he said, his voice hardening again. He settled against a rock, his rifle resting across his lap. "Don't you worry about me, Miss Blackwood. I'm used to short nights." Exhaustion was a heavy blanket, pulling her down. As she lay on the bedroll, the events of the day crashed over her. The attack, the fear, the gunshots, the rescue. "Elijah?" she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "Yes? Why did you help me? You could have just ridden by." In the firelight, his face was a mask of shadows and light. "Some things a man can't ride past, Miss Blackwood. A lady in danger is one of them." "Clara," she whispered. "Please, call me Clara." As sleep finally took her, she thought she heard him say it, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Good night, Clara." But as she drifted off, a flicker of movement on the ridge of the canyon caught her eye. Just for a second. A silhouette of a man on horseback, watching them. Then it was gone. She told herself it was a trick of the firelight, a product of her exhausted mind, but a cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. They weren't alone out here. Someone was watching them, and Elijah, sitting with his back to the ridge, had no idea. The smell of coffee pulled Clara from a restless sleep. She sat up, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. The memory of the figure on the ridge returned with a jolt. Elijah was by the fire, his back still to the canyon wall. He looked as if he hadn't moved all night. "Morning," he said, turning as she stirred. His eyes were clear, alert. He hadn't missed a thing. Or had he? She had to tell him. "Elijah, last night I thought I saw someone." He didn't look surprised. He just handed her a tin cup of coffee. "On the ridge?" Her eyes widened. "You saw him too?" "I saw his tracks this morning. One rider. Watched us for a while, then rode off, headed east, toward Silver Creek." A chill went through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. "He's one of them? A friend of the bandits?" "Likely," Elijah said grimly, his jaw tight. "He's gone to warn them we're coming." So this wasn't just a journey anymore. It was a race, and they were riding straight into a trap. "What are we going to do?" "We're going to do exactly what they expect us to do," he said, his eyes like chips of ice. "We're going to ride to Silver Creek, but we're going to be ready for them." They broke camp and set out as the sun began its relentless climb. The silence between them was different now, charged with tension. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like a whispered warning. By midday, the heat was a physical weight. Just when Clara thought she couldn't stand it another minute, Elijah pointed to a cluster of buildings shimmering in the distance. "Waller's trading post. We can get supplies and find you a horse." The trading post was a ramshackle building, cool and dark inside. A stooped, gray-haired man named Jebediah peered at them over his spectacles. "Afternoon, folks. What can I get for you?" "Supplies," Elijah said, his eyes scanning the room. "And the lady needs a horse, and we need some information. Heard any news from the road to Silver Creek?" Jebediah's eyes flickered. "Road's quiet as a grave, friend. Why you asking?" Elijah reached into his pocket and placed a folded piece of paper on the counter. Clara saw the glint of a tin star pinned inside, a deputy marshal's badge. The trader's demeanor changed instantly. "Well now, deputy, should have said so." He leaned in conspiratorially. "The Raven Gang has been a plague on these parts. The marshal in Silver Creek, Gibson, he's laid up. Took a bullet trying to bring them in. Clara's heart pounded. This was bigger than she ever imagined. Elijah wasn't just a bounty hunter. He was the law, or working for it, at least. "While I look at those horses," Elijah said, "maybe you could show the lady to the washroom." Jebediah nodded eagerly. "Of course, deputy. My wife keeps it clean." As Clara walked to the back, she felt the trader's eyes on her. Something was wrong. He was too friendly, too helpful. When she came out, Elijah had found her a sturdy mare he called Penny. He'd also bought her a pair of canvas trousers and a cotton shirt. "More practical for riding," he said, a faint flush on his cheeks. She changed in a back room, grateful for the freedom of movement the new clothes provided. As she stepped back into the main store, she saw it. Jebediah was standing at the counter, slipping a small folded note to a young boy. The boy darted out the back door, and a minute later, Clara heard the frantic drumming of a horse's hooves, riding away at a full gallop. Riding east, toward Silver Creek. Her blood ran cold. She looked at Elijah, her eyes wide with fear. He met her gaze and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He'd seen it too. "Thank you for your help, Jebediah," Elijah said, his voice perfectly calm as he paid for their things. "Any time, deputy," the old man said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Safe travels." As they mounted their horses outside, Clara couldn't keep the tremor from her voice. "He warned them. He sent a rider." "I know," Elijah said grimly, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "Then we can't go to Silver Creek. It's a trap." "It was always a trap," Elijah replied, his voice low and dangerous. "The only difference is, now we know it for sure." He looked over at her, his expression a mixture of grim determination and something else, something she couldn't quite name. "They think they're the hunters. It's time we showed them they're the prey." The rest of the journey passed in a blur of dust and tension. Elijah pushed them hard, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He taught her how to handle her horse, how to read the terrain, how to listen to the silence of the desert. She was a surprisingly quick learner, fueled by a mixture of fear and a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose. As they rode, he finally told her more about himself, not about his parents, but about Sarah. "The Raven Gang didn't just rob people," he said one evening as they sat by a carefully hidden fire. "They destroyed them." His voice was flat, stripped of all emotion. "They hit her family's ranch a year ago. I was away on a cattle drive. By the time I got the news, it was too late." He wasn't just a lawman hunting criminals. He was a man hunting the ghosts of his past. This wasn't about justice. It was about revenge. And Clara was riding straight into the heart of it with him. When they crested the final hill and saw Silver Creek nestled in the valley below, it looked peaceful, beautiful even. A church steeple rose against the blue sky, smoke curled from chimneys, and the sound of a blacksmith's hammer echoed faintly on the breeze. It looked like a sanctuary, but Clara knew better. It was a snake pit. "My aunt's shop is on Main Street," she said, her voice tight. "Blackwood's fine dressmaking." "Let's get you there," Elijah said. "They'll be expecting us." They rode into town, and it was like riding onto a stage. People stopped and stared. Whispers followed them down the street. They weren't just curious glances. They were watchful, wary. The whole town knew they were coming. The whole town was part of the trap. They found the shop, a neat little storefront with elegant dresses in the window. Elijah helped her down from Penny, his hands lingering at her waist. His eyes searched hers. "You'll be all right from here?" She wanted to scream no. She wanted to beg him to ride away with her, to leave this cursed town behind. But she just nodded. "Yes." "I need to see the marshal," he said. "Let them know I've arrived." He gave her a look that was both a warning and a promise. "Stay inside. Lock the door." He turned and rode away, leaving her alone on the boardwalk. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door to her aunt's shop. A bell jingled. A woman with Clara's same auburn hair, now streaked with silver, looked up from a bolt of fabric. Her face broke into a wide, joyful smile. "Clara, my dear girl, you're here!" Aunt Catherine rushed forward, pulling her into a tight, lavender-scented hug. But as she pulled back, the smile on her face faltered. Her eyes darted towards the street, her expression suddenly filled with a desperate, gut-wrenching fear. "Oh, child," she whispered, her voice trembling as she gripped Clara's arms. "What have you done? You shouldn't have come here." The warm, welcoming shop suddenly felt like a cage. Clara stared at her aunt, at the raw terror in her eyes, and a horrifying realization dawned on her. Her aunt wasn't just scared for her, she was scared of her. "Aunt Catherine, what is it? What's wrong?" Clara's voice was a whisper. Her aunt pulled her deeper into the shop, away from the windows, her movements frantic. "It's this town, Clara. It's not what it seems." She wrung her hands, her knuckles white. "There's a man here, Silas Croft. He owns the bank, the saloon, half the businesses on this street. He owns everything, including me." The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Silas Croft, the banker from Tucson. The man who had foreclosed on her father, who had taken their home, who had left her with nothing. He was here. I owed him money," Catherine confessed, her voice cracking. "My husband, before he passed, he made some bad investments. Croft, he was so charming at first. He offered to help. But his help was a poison. Now I owe him everything. I'm trapped." Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. The one person she thought she could trust, the safe harbor she had journeyed so far to find, was caught in the very same web. "The Raven Gang," Clara breathed, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. "They work for him, don't they?" Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. "They're his enforcers. They do his dirty work. The stagecoach robbery. Oh, Clara, he must have found out you were coming. He must have wanted to stop you. Why? Why would Croft care about one penniless girl?" "Your father," Catherine said, as if reading her mind. "Before he died, he was writing letters to the territorial marshal. He'd found proof that Croft wasn't just a banker. He was running a criminal empire out of Tucson. Land grabs, illegal mining claims. Your father had the ledgers to prove it. He must have hidden them. Croft probably thought you knew where they were. So this was never about a simple robbery. It was an assassination attempt. Croft wanted her dead to protect his secrets, and now she had walked right into his town, right into his grasp. Just then, the bell on the shop door jingled again. Both women froze. A man stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed in a fine wool suit, a silver-headed cane in his hand. He was handsome, with silver hair at his temples and a smile that was all charm on the surface and all predator underneath. "Catherine, my dear," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "I see your guest has arrived." His eyes, cold and gray as a storm cloud, settled on Clara. "Miss Blackwood, a distinct pleasure. I am Silas Croft. I do hope your journey wasn't too eventful." The threat hung in the air, unspoken, but deadly. Before Clara could find her voice, the man's eyes shifted, looking past her towards the back room. A flicker of annoyance crossed his perfect features. And then Elijah stepped out of the shadows. He hadn't gone to the marshal's office. He'd come in the back way. He must have sensed the danger, the same way he'd sensed the watcher on the ridge. He held his pistol in his hand, its barrel pointed steadily at Croft's chest. "Croft," Elijah said, his voice a low growl. "I've been looking for you." Croft's charming smile didn't falter. He looked from Elijah to Clara, then back again. "Ah, the famous Elijah Dawson, the man with a vendetta. I heard you were in the territory. I must confess, I didn't expect you to be Miss Blackwood's personal bodyguard. How delightfully provincial. "The men you sent to kill her failed," Elijah said, taking a step forward. "Just like the men you sent to kill Sarah's family failed to kill me." "Failures are so untidy," Croft said with a sigh, as if discussing a poor business transaction. He tapped his cane on the floorboards. But then, one must learn from one's mistakes. Suddenly, the front door burst open. Two of Croft's thugs, the same kind of men from the way station, filled the doorway, their guns drawn. At the same time, the back door crashed open and two more appeared. They were completely surrounded. The shop was a kill box. Croft's smile widened. "You see, Mr. Dawson, this is my town, my board, and you," he said, his gaze landing on Elijah, "are merely a pawn who has wandered into the wrong game." He then turned his cold eyes to Clara. "And as for you, my dear, it's time you told me where your father hid those ledgers." He took a step towards her. Elijah shifted, placing himself between them. "You'll have to go through me." "An obstacle?" Croft mused. "But a temporary one?" He gave a slight nod to his men. The world exploded in a chaos of sound and motion. Elijah fired first, dropping the man closest to him. He shoved Clara and her aunt to the floor behind a heavy cutting table, just as the room filled with the roar of gunshots and the splintering of wood. Glass from the front window shattered, raining down like sharp, glittering hail. Clara's ears rang. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Peeking over the edge of the table, she saw Elijah, a phantom of deadly grace, moving between the dress forms and bolts of fabric. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, his pistol bucking in his hand. Two more of Croft's men went down, but Croft was gone. In the confusion, he had slipped out the back. "He's getting away!" Clara screamed. Elijah didn't hesitate. He vaulted over the counter and disappeared through the back door in pursuit. The last of Croft's men, seeing his boss had fled, fired one last wild shot before turning and running out the front. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged sound of Catherine's sobbing and the distant pounding of running feet. "We have to help him," Clara said, scrambling to her feet. "No, Clara, it's too dangerous," her aunt cried, grabbing her arm. But Clara shook her head, her mind racing. Croft wasn't just a businessman. He was a snake. He wouldn't just run. He'd run to his nest, to his power. "The bank," Clara said, her voice filled with a certainty that surprised even herself. "He's gone to the bank." She ignored her aunt's pleas and ran out the back door into the alley. The sounds of the chase were already fading. She ran towards Main Street, her heart a frantic hammer in her chest. She had to get to Elijah. She couldn't lose him now. As she rounded the corner onto Main Street, she saw it. The Silver Creek Bank stood at the end of the road, solid and imposing, and in front of it, a nightmare was unfolding. Silas Croft stood on the bank's steps. He had Elijah's gun, and he was pressing its barrel to Elijah's temple. Two of his men held Elijah's arms pinned behind his back. He'd been ambushed in the alley. It had been another trap. "Drop the rifle, Dawson, or your lady friend is next," Croft had probably said, and Elijah, to save her, had complied. "An impressive performance, Mr. Dawson," Croft called out, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent street. The townsfolk were gone, vanished behind closed doors. "But the show is over." He smiled at Clara, a cold, triumphant smirk. "Now, Miss Blackwood, for the last time, the ledgers. Where are they?" Clara's mind was a whirlwind of panic. The ledgers? She had no idea. Her father had never told her. They could be anywhere. They could be destroyed. But as she looked at Croft, at the bank behind him, something her father used to say came back to her. A phrase he'd repeat after a long night of poker. "Every gambler has a tell, and every house has a back door." The bank. It wasn't just a bank. Her aunt had said Croft bought up half the town. Old buildings repurposed. What was the bank before it was a bank? She scanned the building's facade, the architecture, It was older than the other buildings. It had once been grander. It had been a gambling hall. Her father had told her stories about them. The fancy halls in the big cities always had secret tunnels, escape routes for high-stakes players who got into trouble, or for politicians who didn't want to be seen. A back door. I know where they are, she lied, her voice shaking but loud enough for Croft to hear. She had to buy time. They're hidden in my aunt's shop, in a secret compartment in the floor. Croft's eyes narrowed. He was suspicious, but the greed for the ledgers, the one piece of evidence that could destroy him, was stronger. Go and get them, he ordered one of his men. You two, he nodded to the men holding Elijah. Bring him inside. And you, my dear, his eyes bored into Clara, will join us to ensure your associate doesn't try anything foolish. It was a risk, a terrible risk, but it was the only chance she had. As they dragged Elijah into the bank and another man shoved her after them, she cast one last desperate glance down the alley that ran alongside the building. Halfway down, almost hidden by a stack of old crates, was a small, low door, an old cellar entrance, the back door. Inside, the bank was opulent and cold. Croft shoved Elijah into the manager's office and tied him to a chair. He did the same to Clara, her back to Elijah's. Now we wait, Croft said, pacing in front of them. And if my man comes back empty-handed, well, let's just say I will be exceedingly disappointed in you both. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. Clara could feel Elijah struggling against his ropes behind her. The cellar, she whispered, her voice so low she could barely hear it herself. What? Elijah hissed back. This place was a gambling hall. There has to be a cellar entrance in the alley. It was a wild guess, a desperate hope. Outside, they heard shouting. Croft's man must have torn her aunt's shop apart and found nothing. Croft cursed, his charming facade finally cracking. He strode towards the office door. It seems you've been lying to me, Miss Blackwood. He raised his pistol. At that exact moment, the heavy office door, the one Croft was standing right in front of, flew open with explosive force. It slammed into Croft, sending him stumbling sideways. A figure stood in the doorway, covered in dust and cobwebs, holding a heavy iron pry bar like a club. It was Aunt Catherine. "Get away from my niece, you son of a bitch!" she screamed, her face a mask of pure fury. For a split second, everyone was frozen in shock. That second was all Elijah needed. With a roar of effort, he snapped the ropes binding his hands and launched himself out of the chair, tackling the remaining thug to the ground. Clara, working frantically, freed her own hands and scrambled for the pistol Croft had dropped. It was over in seconds. Croft, dazed and disoriented, was no match for a furious woman with an iron bar. Elijah had his man subdued. Sirens wailed in the distance. The real marshal, alerted by the gunfire, was finally on his way. Later, as the dust settled and Croft and his men were being hauled away in chains, Elijah stood with Clara and her aunt in the wrecked dress shop. "How did you know?" Clara asked her aunt. "I heard you whispering," Catherine said, a shaky smile on her face. "When Silas took you, I remembered that old cellar door. I prayed you were right." Elijah turned to Clara, his blue eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. It was more than gratitude, it was awe. "You saved us, Clara. Your wits. You saved us all." "My father always said my curiosity would be my downfall," she said, a real smile finally reaching her lips. "Turns out it was my salvation." And then she remembered. The ledgers. They weren't in the shop. They weren't anywhere she knew. "The ledgers are real, though," Catherine said suddenly. "Your father sent them to me for safekeeping a month before he died. He knew Croft was closing in. They're buried under the hearthstone in my back room." The final piece of the puzzle, the proof that would put Silas Croft away for the rest of his miserable life. Elijah stepped closer to Clara, his hand gently touching her cheek. His job here is done, she thought. Now he'll leave. The thought was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. I came to Silver Creek for revenge, he said quietly, his gaze intense. But I found something else. Something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? She whispered, her heart pounding. A reason to stay. He leaned in, and this time there were no bandits, no guns, no danger. It was just them. His lips met hers, a kiss that was both a promise and a beginning. It wasn't stolen in violence, but given freely in the aftermath of a storm they had weathered together. It wasn't her first kiss. Her first kiss, she realized, had happened somewhere on that dusty trail, in a shared look across a campfire, in the silent promise of protection he had offered. This was something more. This was the start of a new story. In the end, it turned out that some things truly were sacred, and finding a home, not in a place, but in a person, was the most sacred thing of all. If you enjoyed this story of justice and unexpected love in the Old West, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And let me know in the comments, did you ever suspect the banker was the real villain behind it all?